So it was a gorgeous wedding. It was just lovely. The day was perfect. The bride was beautiful. The food was great. The band was perfect. You know, it was beautiful, except you could not ignore at least if you were me and knew the family, the distance between the oldest daughter and the youngest at the reception. I mean, they just were like so far apart. And later on, I talked to the mom, who's a friend of mine, about it, and she was like, it just never ends. You know, the oldest daughter is a super responsible one, and she's always there, and she always shows up, and after the, you know, during the reception, she was taking care of her kids and taking care of everybody's kids and keeping a safe distance from the youngest daughter, who you sort of never really know if she's going to show up, right? And she shows up this time, of course, with lots of gifts to lavish, and everybody just adores her. And my friend just said, you know, when I think they're going to make a connection, you know, they just can't. It's just so much distance. And listening to her, I had this phrase that humans, that we are distance-making machines. We just have this tendency to push other people away from us. And even when our intentions are really good, I think of this really wise teacher, this person I really care for. She's retired now, long retired, but she taught science. She's really bright. Her kids were gifted, and she talked about how things changed from her early days teaching high school science. Then as, you know, it became more and more like you stratified the kids, and these kids were in advanced placement, and these kids were that. And she understood why, but she also said it was really harder for the lower or the slower or the more challenged students, that they really kind of got left behind by not being it. So it's like that tendency to distance just creates more distance. You know, really, distance-making machines. Some of you have probably seen, there's been a lot of surveys and stories and studies showing how super wealthy people literally feel less empathy. I mean, like, they can measure people's brains, they can show someone suffering, and they can measure the brain activity, and someone really, really wealthy has a lower response than someone poor or someone middle class. You may have seen the story in the Atlantic this last week called "Power Causes Brain Damage," which was an interesting story. It's actually repeated from a few years ago, but now it's not just behavioral scientists, but this is actually neuroscientists who are like measuring the brains of like the super most powerful people, and showing that somehow from the time they aren't like this to begin with, but become so powerful, like their brain, the part of the brain that mirrors and looks at and identifies with, literally sort of begins to disintegrate and quits working. And they were using the example of, do you remember a few years ago when Wells Fargo had that scandal where they had those employees who created the fake accounts, and, you know, just somebody who's banks at Wells Fargo, you know, then have 6 or 7 accounts with all these fees coming in. And they were talking about how the CEO of Wells Fargo, when he was hauled up to testify before the Senate, like, he just couldn't understand why there was a problem with that. Like the senators were like, do you not see like how much damage this did to your clients? And he just like literally could not comprehend that this might be a problem, especially for somebody just scraping by, right? So this kind of distance-making machine, we can do that. And we're not the first people, because you also see it in the scripture today. You see it a lot in the Gospel of Luke. We're coming towards the end of the Gospel of Luke. I do like the Gospel of Luke, but we're going to switch into Matthew and Advent. And Luke, you know, think about the parables we've heard, the prodigal son and the prudent son, right? So there's and they couldn't be further apart, right? They're just going to be, or what did we hear a few weeks ago, the rich man and Lazarus, and there was that great chasm, that distance. And then today we've got the Pharisee and the tax collector. And in a way, the gospel writer even kind of pushes them further away than they need to be. Because we've got the Pharisee, and we hear that word and we think hypocrite, self-righteous. But really, if you go back to the first century, the word Pharisee, you know, it'd probably be like if you ask my friend Rabbi Doug today, it's kind of like your respected rabbi, really. It's kind of like somebody who was a Jewish leader, somebody who, Pharisees different from Sadducees, kind of interpreted, you know, and allowed more things in the law. This Pharisee is excessively faithful. That's what we're told. He fasts twice a week and he tithes on everything. Neither of those things were expected or necessary. So he's like super good. So the older I get, the more I'm like, give me some Pharisees to hang out with, you know? And to be totally honest, most of the things I do during the week and most of the activities and organizations I'm a part of, I go to because other people are going to be there who are more faithful than me. Like, you know, stand me up next to some Pharisees. Like my friend Tex Sample, Thursday morning, we had the Faith and Labor breakfast, and that's what it is. Faith and labor leaders coming together to try to create a democracy and an economy that works for everybody. A lot of you know Tex Sample. He's been a professor of ethics in this city forever. For a white guy, he's written more about racial and economic justice than probably just about anybody. He's at every march, every rally, always speaking up, always speaking out. After he retired from academia, then he became a pastor, and then they needed him another church, then he became a pastor. He's retired. He finally retired in June for the last time at the age of 85, right? And we've worked together over 35 years on lots of things, and I know that Tex is a double tither because he's mentioned that to me a couple of times when we were raising money for things. And that means what it says it means. He gives 20% of his income to organizations and things, right? Well, let me just say, I don't believe in a judgment day, but if there is one, stand me right next to Tex, right? So like maybe, you know, like that Jewish idea that the deeds of the ancestors, that, you know, if he's got more than he needs, he'll sort of come on over me, right? I'm going to stand right next to Tex and right on the other side next to Pat Jones Macklin. I don't know if any of you all know Pat. She's a force of nature. I think she's the vice president of the NAACP right now, and she's the head of the A. Philip Randolph Institute, which is a historic black trade union group. I don't know how old she is. She's been retired for a while too. She was a teacher, then she mainly worked on teachers' unions and justice issues, and I think, God love her, I think she's in charge of the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition for this election on this side. So Pat Jones, I mean, like if there's an election and it goes off okay, it's Pat on this side of the state line and Denise Lieberman over in St. Louis. And she's just the most faithful person. She lost her husband a few years ago. He was a great preacher, preached his first sermon when he was 4. So I just tell you what, I'm going to stand right between Tex and Pat, okay? And that goodness is just going to come all over me. But it's not just those people. There's also Daniel, who spoke here a few weeks ago, right? In case there's also a lot of young people out there doing amazing things, right? Like our little girl over there having the Kool-Aid stand or lemonade stand for Cherith Brook. All of our people out there just doing loving, gracious things. Give me some Pharisees, right? And then you've got the tax collector. The tax collector, again, you know, Zacchaeus was a wee little man and we love him, right? Who doesn't love Zacchaeus? Dude, he was a freaking agent of the Roman Empire, right? He was shaking people down, okay? He's like, this is not like everybody who heard this would have really liked it. You know, he was just out, you know, kind of like, you know, if you think about, you know, when the county raised the tax rates so high and people lost their houses. That's kind of what we're getting at here. Except in this situation, he goes to the temple, and what does he do? I mean, that took some bravery and courage because people weren't excited to have him there. I'm like, why is this guy here? We don't want him, right? And then he also confesses. He confesses his own sin, his own humility. You know, Lachi kept using the word humble. I mean, there's this humbleness in there. Who doesn't need that, right? Who doesn't need a little bravery, a little honesty? I mean, I talked about that last week. Let's not be so defensive about who we are, right? Our own shortcomings, our own tendency to gobble and grab and to push other people away. So give me some Pharisees and some tax collectors, right? We're in a pretty good little spot there. I've been thinking about that a lot this week because I've been thinking about what it really means to be a congregation and how it is that we draw close to one another. And if there's a problem in this parable, it's not so much the Pharisee or the tax collector, it's that both of them create some distance. The scripture tells us the Pharisee was standing off by himself. That might not have been such a problem. I'm glad I'm not a rogue, an adulterer, or a thief. I mean, you know, who's not glad? But then he's like, and I'm glad I'm not that tax collector. So he pushes the tax collector away. And the tax collector, what does it say? The tax collector was standing off by himself. I mean, it's almost like the tax collector couldn't really quite claim and understand that he belonged. So there's this pushing away from the two. And then the gospel writer Luke kind of makes it worse because the gospel writer Luke translates it this way. That man, the tax collector, was justified rather than the other guy. And Rabbi Amy Jill Levine, teaches New Testament at Duke, at Vanderbilt, points out that the word rather there, the Greek preposition para, can also be translated because of, or on account of, or alongside. So it could be the tax collector was justified because of the Pharisee, or on account of the Pharisee, or alongside the Pharisee. You see the difference between rather than and because of or alongside? Like we're being brought back together, right? I mean, there's a part of us and that's exactly the reason That's the exact reason to have a community of faith, or to have a temple, or to have a theater, or have or any good organization you're a part of, because, you know, we're justified, we're saved, we're made whole, we're healed, what? Hanging out with other people, like who help us stretch and grow. And we've heard that over and over the last few weeks when we've had the little sayings for our stewardship, for our intentional giving. I mean, I feel like me and Paula, especially since COVID, you know, we're kind of running, we're the girls' social chairman. You know, we're trying to get everybody to come and be and kind of push against the isolation. The isolation, the distancing is so intense. And it's like, come on, let's be together, let's reach out, let's push, let's come together. And interestingly enough, all the people who've spoken about why they're a part of Peace Church, I mean, people have said gracious things about the messages and the music, but then they've also said it's the community, it's the people who we're a part of. Like, did you hear what Kathy Schwamberger said last week? I mean, she said she didn't even plan to be a part of a church, right? She's off in Napa Valley, and we had known each other, and she looked me up. She hadn't been going to church in 20 years. And she came here, and she thought, oh my gosh, you know, the messages, the music, but what? The community. I mean, in a world that has decided that it's going to lose its mind, right? History's been leaning on me lightly. You know, I don't know what, all the things I thought I knew when I was young and you were too have turned out to be broken. I don't know what's next, right? I mean, we're out there floundering at the sea. Get a community of people who can encircle you and encourage you and remind you that the goal is not to come here, to be here where we can be holy, good people together. No, the goal is the temple is everywhere, right? It's like that Mary Oliver prayer, you know, that's a poem. Where does the temple end and where does it begin, right? I mean, all day long I'm looking with my eyes and my arms wide open, praying that it will come to me. I mean, the temple, where is the temple, folks? The temple is your home. The temple is your bedroom. It's your kitchen. It's your street. It's your work. It's your dance company. It's your desk at UMKC. I mean, your temple is every single place you go. It's walking into Whole Foods or down at Aldi. It's marching in the street. It's going out to vote. I mean, it's reaching out. That is the temple. It is not this place. I mean, I think all of us who grew up, you know, and had kids, you went to church, and like everybody's like, yeah, my kids don't really go to church, right? But if our kids are out there living the temple wherever they go, right, and offering it to themselves and reaching deep and seeing that they're valued and holy and being sustained by one another, right? So my son called me Friday night. I was with Michael and my husband, and then I was like, not with Michael and my husband, because whose 25-year-old calls him on a Friday night at 9 o'clock, right? That's never a good thing. So he had that day, and those of you know, he directs the sailing program on the East Coast. So the whole metaphor of the world being tossed and turned and floundering at the sea, that's kind of what he lives. Because he works with young people and youth, and he's in there, you know, with all the kids, with all their issues and all the stuff they're going on. And it had been one of those days with like a really crashing, difficult low. Like a really, any of you who are teachers or coaches, you know that day, right? When the kid you've been trying to reach and trying to reach and trying to reach is just lost, and you just feel like, you know, I mean, it's just the worst feeling in the world. But there was also an incredible high. The incredible high was that he had taken a father and daughter sailing. They weren't members of the club. They'd called. This wasn't the first time he'd taken them sailing. They called sometime a few months ago, and the daughter said, you know, my dad loves to sail. He loves to sail, but he's had to give up his boat. He can't really sail by himself anymore. Is there any way I could come over there? And so Ben sort of struck up a friendship. And he talked about this day they had on the water and how the daughter and her father were talking to him, are you registered to vote? You know, the community matters. We've got to do what we can. And he was just talking about what a deep connection they had and how Ben was thinking, you know, I'm going to go see the guy at his senior center. And Ben said what a great time the guy had and how he was able to like pitch in and help. A pretty good day for a 97-year-old. You know, it's alongside, folks. It's alongside. That's how we're saved and healed and restored, right? It's not rather than or over against. It's because of we learn, we grow, we heal together with one another, the knowledge, trying to bring together, trying to think, what can I learn from Pat and Tex, and what can I even learn from the person that I want to push away? So may God come to us in our distance making, in our healing, in our justice, in our love. Keep opening us, stretching us, calling us to grow and to reach and to love. Amen.